you always get what you want, invariably. Even though you may think that it's entirely opposed to your wishes. But if it's your karma, everything that happens to you, put in another way, everything that comes to you is a return to you of what goes out of you. Yes, obviously, that's absurd. If you confine the definition of yourself to your voluntary, conscious behavior. That's a ridiculous definition of oneself. Oneself, by any stretch of the imagination, must involve far more than the conscious and voluntary aspects of our behavior. And if we see that it involves intimately and inescapably the behavior of what we call the other, the not-self, the environment, and see that these two are moving together like the two sides of the snake when it swims, then you get a very curious feeling. You have to be careful of it if you've got a Western background. Because, and this is what happens to a lot of people who play around with psychedelic chemicals, there are many, many cases of inflation among these people. That is to say, when you get this sensation that the two sides of the world, the inside and the outside, are moving together, you may think, I am ruling it. I am God in the Western sense of the word. Therefore, your ego, instead of being, as it were, integrated and transcended with all this process, merely assumes vast dimensions, has megalomania, is blown up by the mystical experience. And so you get the holier-than-thou people going around who seem to think that they're above all human conventions and have no obligations to anyone or anything, because they're divine and they can do as they damn please. What they haven't realized is that doing as you will isn't a new kind of behavior that you suddenly put on and say, from now on I'm going to go around doing as I will. You have to realize first that that's what you've always been doing. And you could look at this from a very simple point of view. It's not a complete point of view. But you can say, well, now what about the people who did good and who did the things that they didn't want to do? You know, everybody's mother said to us, darling, sometimes we have to do things we don't like. Well, what about that? Well, you can always say, the kid obeyed the mother and did the thing that it didn't like because that was the better part of wisdom. In other words, if it hadn't done that, something worse would have happened. And we choose the lesser of two evils. And when you find yourself in a situation where you have to choose the lesser of two evils, then you say, I want out of here. And you take the easiest way. You take the line of least resistance. So that's your doing. Now, you can pursue that more profoundly when you stop thinking about human behavior as something that responds to the compulsion of an environment. And you can get out of that when you see the behavior of the environment as an essential aspect of you. So it isn't, as it were, the environment starting something, which you are therefore compelled to follow. It's the whole system moving together. So then, you get in the state of liberated or mystical consciousness, you very often feel that a hill is lifting you up as you walk up it. The ground seems to heave beneath your feet, and up you go. And you get this strange feeling of lightness, of effortlessness, walking on air, never a care, you know, this wonderful sense that there are no obstructions anywhere. There's nothing, as it were, banging you and making you do that. It all flows together. And that's a very common sense. You are actually, in that state of consciousness, you are perceiving the goings-on, the Tao, the course of nature, in the way it's happening. But in the ordinary way, you've been conditioned to resist it, to fight it, and to use those sensations of resistance to create a sensory basis for what you describe as the ego. The ego in practice is a sense of strain. When you are aware of I, you are aware of a basic discomfort, which is located basically between the eyes, somewhere in here, a sort of tightness. Also, it's in other centers too. It's in the solar plexus, and there are various physical centers, in other words, where this constant tension or resistance against it is going on. And that's what you feel when you talk about I. When that tension ceases, you discover immediately that the separate ego has disappeared, and that what I refers to is simply the total panorama of experience, everything that's happening. Obviously, I don't know all of it, because I can't inspect all of it with my radar, with my conscious attention. That would be a ridiculous undertaking, to know everything in that sense. We know it in a much better way, as we know how to grow hair and open and close our hands. So, this point of view can be understood if we clarify the initial problems we have about it. And I suppose the first problem is, if we accept the notion that everything that happens to us is our own karma, our own doing, then we have to be very careful of, shall we say, the devil of omnipotence, of inflation, of feeling that your ego is what is in control of all this. And the second thing is, if you think then that everything that happens to everybody is what they really want to happen, then you can absolve yourself from any qualms about being unkind to someone, because you could say, well, the unkindness I did you was what you really wanted, wasn't it? You know that business about the responsibility of the person who gets murdered for getting murdered? There is a curious sense in which a lot of people go around looking for trouble. Freud pointed out quite correctly the psychology of accident-prone individuals. They seem to be attracting trouble like lights attract moths. And we're all doing that, but we manage to remain unconscious of it, so that we can praise and blame and play the game which says, that's not my fault, that's your fault. And so we go around apportioning faults to everybody. Because if we're going to apportion praise for what the good things people do, you can't make praise mean anything unless you also go around blaming. Praise and blame go together. Supposing everybody was acting in a praiseworthy way, and we praised everybody for everything, they'd get tired of it. They wouldn't even notice it anymore. So long as you're going to get a kick out of being praised, you've got to go around blaming too. It's very simple. But if you see the folly of that praising and blaming are just creating each other, then you don't praise and you don't blame. You just dig the whole thing. And that's why, when we encounter very great sages, you never hear them blame people, and they very rarely praise anyone. You try to start gossip in the presence of such a person, and you make a derogatory comment about someone. It's as if you had thrown a rock into a well and heard no splash. And a funny feeling, because that you get no response. You get no agreement. And if you praise somebody, there's also likely nothing to be said, except perhaps some remark that, of course, you're praising the beloved in all its manifestations. And this disconcerts some people terribly. I've always noticed that real sages never gossip, never criticize persons. And because they understand so well The French saying, tout comprendre, c'est tout pardonner, to understand all is to forgive all, is so true if you are experienced in just the ordinary way of dealing with human problems. If you've been a counselor or psychotherapist or minister or anything like that, you very soon get to realize how vastly complicated people are, and to see that they really are in the messes they're in, not because of anything, but that's the way it is. And you stop blaming people, and because you don't blame people, you have open ears, and people come and seek your advice. They don't want to come to someone who's a counselor who will bawl them out. It's like dentists who simply accept the fact that people really don't take care of their teeth, and realize that the job of a dentist is precisely to look after people who can't be bothered to take care of their teeth. That's why he's in business. So a good dentist doesn't bawl his patients out because they didn't do this, that, and the other. Just accept it. Same with doctors. They know perfectly well that nobody's going to live by the rules of health. And they're very vague as to what they are. And, you know, there's every kind of theory about how you ought to live and what is healthy, but they change in fashion. And you ought to eat this kind of diet in 1921. By the time it's 1930, they've changed their ideas altogether. And by the time it's 1960, it's back again to a mixture between 1921 and 1894. Something like that. You see, it's always changing. So while the rules are not so... See, if they were all absurd, it would be easy. They're not all absurd. There's some truth in it, always. But nobody's ever quite sure. So the function of healers and doctors and so on is just to do what can be done to stop the mess getting too messy. And they must accept it as that. That's their job. If I were healthy, say to the doctor, I wouldn't need you. So you're in business. Now, what about it then? We have difficulty in seeing this mutuality of our relationship to the rest of the world because it's contrary to common sense, contrary to the way we've been brought up. And therefore we have what I would call an initial intellectual block to understanding it, quite apart from any emotional blocks or anything of that kind. But obviously, we must overcome that intellectual block if we're going to go any further and actually realize and feel this way of life's working and this relationship between what you do and what happens to you. Then the question arises, then what do I do? Do I go around saying to myself, all this that's happening to you is what I wanted? I am inside and outside. I am the subjective and I am the objective. I don't mean to go around thinking thoughts about this, so as it were to talk yourself into this way of feeling. Well, that's very superficial, because this new sense of relationship to nature is something much more than an idea. See, ecologists and physicists have the idea that this is so, but they mostly in their private life and in their ordinary human behavior are just like other people who don't feel it and who feel themselves in a Newtonian billiards game, even though they've gone on to quantum mechanics. So that there may be a transition from our ordinary way of feeling how things go on to the new way, we have to do something other than think. Because actually thinking is causing the trouble. It is by thinking that we divide the world into separate events and separate things. That is calculus. And Ananda Kumaraswamy once described the life of the liberated being as a perpetual, uncalculated life in the present. And you say, wow, I don't think I could do that. That saying of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, be not anxious for the morrow, the uncalculated life. If God so clothe the grass of the field, will he not much more clothe you, faithless ones? And I've never met a preacher yet who would really take that up. They all say, well, of course, that's too hard a saying for most of us. It's not practical. Everybody has to take thought for the morrow and calculate. Well, at this point, people can go in two directions. There's one class of people who will say, all right, let's live the uncalculated life. Let's not make any plans. And before you know where they are, they're living in a filthy pad and scrounging around and living on petty thievery and so on. This is the usual thing. This is got into it the wrong way. The first thing to do is, just as I said, whether you like it or not, and whether you know it or not, the relationship between you and the environment is always one that is harmonious. So in the same way, you are always living the uncalculated life. You have to find out, first of all, that you're always doing it, and that what you call your calculations and the things you did were funny little rationalizations. In other words,
it is a most peculiar thing, you see, that a human being can spend an entire lifetime searching for themselves while never realizing they were never truly lost. And yet that is the great game we are all playing, the cosmic game of hide and seek. The universe pretending not to be itself, wandering through space and time in the disguise of you and me. Now, somewhere along the way, we forgot this game. We began to take the disguise rather seriously. We began to believe that this mask we wear, this name, this history, this bundle of memories, was who we really are. And so, the play became a tragedy. Because when the actor forgets he's in a play, the suffering feels very real indeed. But let us begin at the beginning, if such a thing can be said to exist. Imagine, if you will, the moment you were born, not the event itself, but the sense of entering a world that was already in motion. Nobody asked you if you wished to be here. You arrived as a mystery, blinking into a mystery. And the first thing you learned, almost immediately, was that you were something separate. The doctor said, it's a boy, or it's a girl. Someone gave you a name. Someone said, this is you. And in that instant, the great forgetting began. You see, the child does not know that there is a line between itself and the world. When a baby cries, it believes the universe is crying. When it laughs, it believes the whole sky is laughing with it. But very soon, we are taught otherwise. We are told where we end and where everything else begins. That's the first illusion, that there is an inside and an outside, that you are here and the world is there. We even speak of it that way. I came into this world. But that's not how it happened at all. You did not come into this world. You came out of it in precisely the same way a wave comes out of the ocean or a leaf grows out of a tree. You are not a stranger here. You are the universe expressing itself as this particular form for a while. And yet, because of language, because of conditioning, because of fear, we begin to imagine ourselves as isolated fragments. We identify with the body, with the name, with the narrative. And we say, I am this, and nothing more. But tell me, where exactly does this I begin? If I draw a line around your body, is that truly the border of you? Because the air you breathe becomes your blood, and your blood becomes your thought, and your thought changes the world around you. So where do you stop and the world begin? It's quite impossible to say, isn't it? The whole thing is one continuous process, yet our minds have divided it up for convenience. We draw lines, make maps, categorize, define. But the map, you see, is never the territory. The word is never the thing. The idea of you is not you. And yet, we have mistaken the symbol for the reality. This is why people suffer. Because we have been hypnotized by words, by images, by the great myth of separateness. The ancient Hindus called this Maya, the illusion that tricks consciousness into believing it is something apart from itself. And from this illusion springs all the great human dramas: fear, greed, ambition, loneliness, the endless craving to become something more. When you think you are a separate being, the universe becomes a threat. Everything outside is either something to be conquered or something to be avoided. You must protect yourself. You must compete. You must achieve. And so you spend your life struggling to survive, never realizing that the very energy of that struggle is the same energy that moves the stars. It is rather like a wave on the ocean trying not to be wet. The wave says, I must maintain my shape, my identity. I must fight against all the other waves. And in doing so, it forgets that it is the ocean itself. You and I are doing exactly that. We have become obsessed with being somebody rather than simply being. Now, this forgetting is not a mistake. It's part of the game. The universe hides itself from itself so that it can experience the joy of rediscovery. The darkness is necessary for light to recognize itself. The silence gives meaning to sound. And in the same way, forgetting who you are is the prelude to awakening. But the tragedy of our modern life is that we've made the forgetting permanent. We have built entire civilizations around the idea of separation. We have systems that reward competition and punish stillness. We have machines that amplify distraction. We measure worth in numbers, and we mistake productivity for purpose. And so, the game has lost its laughter, the play has forgotten its script. You can see this in the way people live. They move as if haunted, always chasing, always becoming, never arriving. They think salvation lies in the next promotion, the next purchase, the next achievement. But every time they reach the next thing, it dissolves like mist, because what they are truly searching for cannot be owned, cannot be earned, cannot even be found. It can only be remembered. And so the question arises, who or what is it that has forgotten? Who is this I that believes it is lost? If you look closely, you'll find something extraordinary. You'll find that the one who seeks is the very thing being sought. You'll find that beneath all the noise and confusion, there is a silence watching everything. That silence is what you truly are. When you close your eyes at night and the whole world disappears, that silence remains. When your thoughts fade for a brief moment, something is still there, isn't it? The awareness that notices the absence of thought, that's you. Not the story, not the name, not the body, the awareness itself, that which never comes and never goes. But we are so accustomed to looking outward that we miss it. We keep expecting truth to appear in some grand revelation when it has been quietly humming beneath everything all along. Like a song that never ends, only changes its tune. And so, to remember who you are is not to add something new. It is to remove what was never real. It is to peel away the layers of conditioning, fear, and pretense until only the simple fact of being remains. That is where the journey truly begins, not in acquiring, but in noticing. not in striving, but in seeing clearly. You cannot become yourself because you already are. You can only wake up to that fact. And when you do, life begins to feel less like a prison and more like a play. The actors are the same, the scenery unchanged, but suddenly the story is light again. The laughter returns. The wave remembers it is the ocean. That is the beginning of remembering. That is the end of the dream of separation. When you awaken, even for a moment, to the truth of what you are, something remarkable happens. The world does not change, and yet it is utterly transformed. The same faces pass by, the same routines unfold, but there is a new quality to it all, a kind of luminous playfulness, as if the universe has been holding its breath, waiting for you to notice the joke. But it doesn't end there, because the moment we catch a glimpse of truth, the mind rushes in to claim it. It says, "Ah, I understand now. I've figured it out." And that, you see, is the second forgetting. The ego, clever as ever, puts on spiritual clothing and pretends to have seen the light. It becomes the seeker who has found. But remember, the moment you think you've captured truth, you've already lost it. Truth cannot be caught because it is what is doing the catching. It's a very curious situation. The more earnestly you pursue enlightenment, the more it recedes from you. Like chasing your own shadow, the harder you try, the further it slips away. Because you are what you seek. You are the awareness that is looking. And so, to look for yourself is a kind of cosmic comedy. The eye cannot see itself directly, only by reflection. This is why so many spiritual traditions emphasize stillness. Not stillness as in rigid quietness, but the stillness of understanding that there's nowhere to go, that the very act of seeking keeps the illusion alive. To sit quietly and observe is to see that the one doing the seeking is made of the same stuff as the sky, as the wind, as the stars. But here's where the pretending comes in. Even after this realization, life continues. You still have to eat, work, speak, love, and lose. You still stub your toe. You still get caught in emotion. You still wake up in the middle of the night wondering what it all means. The difference is subtle but profound. You now know it's a play. You still act your part, but you no longer mistake the mask for the face. You see, life is not something you overcome. It's something you dance with. The waves do not resist the tide. They move in harmony with it. So, too, does the awakened person move with life, not against it, not above it, but with it. To live this way is to rediscover innocence. A childlike wonder returns, not because you are naive, but because you are no longer cynical. You begin to see that everything is part of the same unfolding. The pain, the joy, the confusion, even the boredom, all of it belongs. All of it is the universe pretending to be separate, pretending to forget, so it can rediscover itself anew. But beware, the mind loves to make a project out of awakening. It says, now I must maintain my spiritual state, I must be mindful all the time. And so it creates yet another identity, the enlightened self. But that too is part of the game. The pretending continues, only now it's cloaked in holiness. The only way out is to see that there is no way out. You cannot escape the play because you are the play. You cannot stop pretending because pretending is part of what you are. The trick, then, is not to end the pretending, but to enjoy it, to see through it without denying it, to laugh at the cosmic joke rather than trying to explain it. Think of life as a grand symphony. Each note, each instrument has its place. Some play melodies, others dissonance. But the beauty lies in the whole, not in any single part. You are both the music and the musician, the listener and the sound. And to live with that awareness is to move through life with a certain grace, not the stiff grace of discipline, but the flowing grace of trust. Trust is the highest form of intelligence. It's not blind belief, it's participation. It's saying yes to the unknown. It's stepping into the rhythm without needing to know the choreography. Because when you trust the flow of life, you find it carries you exactly where you need to be. This doesn't mean you never fall. Of course you fall. But now you understand that even falling is part of the dance. You understand that pain is not punishment, it's the universe moving through you, rearranging, refining, renewing. Every tear, every stumble is another reminder that you are alive. And perhaps that's what we forget most easily, that to be alive is not to be perfect, but to participate. The stars burn and collapse, the trees grow and decay, everything changes, and that change is not a flaw, it's the very expression of beauty. In the end, awakening is not about rising above life, but sinking fully into it. It's not about being calm all the time, but about being real all the time. It's about allowing the whole spectrum of existence to play through you, the laughter, the fear, the tenderness, the confusion, and recognizing that you are not any single note, but the silence from which all of them arise. And so, when you remember who you are, you don't vanish into some mystical void. You re-enter the world with open eyes. You smile at the absurdity of it all. You forgive more easily. You laugh more deeply. You become softer, not weaker. Wiser, not detached. You realize that love is not a feeling, but a way of seeing. You begin to recognize yourself everywhere, in the eyes of the stranger, in the sound of the rain, in the passing wind, because how could you not? The one who once believed they were lost now sees that there was nowhere to go. The one who searched the stars now sees that the light was always within. The pretending continues. But now it is joyful. You play your part beautifully because you know it's a part. You cry when the story calls for tears, and you laugh when the scene becomes absurd. And when the curtain falls, you bow not in defeat, but in gratitude. For you have remembered the secret. The universe keeps whispering that it was you all along. And so, the remembering deepens. For what begins as a glimpse slowly ripens into a way of being, a quiet knowing that hums beneath everything you do. You still move through the world as a person, with a name and a story, but something within you no longer clings so tightly to that story. You wear it lightly now, as you would a costume at a festival. You play your part with sincerity, but you no longer mistake it for who you truly are. This is where the real transformation begins, not in grand revelations or supernatural moments, but in the smallest, most ordinary acts. Making tea, walking through the rain, waiting at a stoplight. You start to notice how extraordinary the ordinary really is. The smell of earth after a storm, the texture of a wooden table beneath your hand, the faint echo of laughter drifting through a window. You begin to live with an intimacy that no philosophy can capture. This is what the mystics mean when they speak of heaven on earth. It is not a place elsewhere. It is this very life, seen clearly, without the veil of judgment or expectation. To live this way is to rediscover wonder. You see that everything, absolutely everything, is sacred because it exists. Even your own confusion, your sorrow, your restlessness, these too are part of the divine dance. But the mind, ever restless, will still try to intervene. It whispers that such peace cannot last, that surely this stillness will vanish. It begins to search for ways to hold on to the state of grace, to capture it like a photograph. Yet every attempt to hold on to stillness destroys it. For stillness is not something to be kept. It is what remains when there is no grasping. And so, you learn to let go again, not as a lesson, but as a rhythm. Letting go becomes breathing. Each inhale takes in the world, and each exhale releases your need to possess it. Life flows through you rather than around you. You realize there was never a separation to begin with, only the illusion of one. In this stage of awakening, something else happens. You begin to see that others, too, are pretending to be separate. Every stranger becomes a mirror, every argument a lesson, every act of cruelty a cry for recognition. You begin to sense the shared ache of humanity, the longing to return home to something that was never lost. This understanding births compassion, not as an effort, but as a natural response. You see yourself in others because you finally see others as yourself. Now, compassion is often misunderstood. It is not pity, nor is it a soft sentiment. True compassion carries clarity. It does not enable illusions, but gently reveals them. When you act from compassion, you do not seek to fix anyone. You simply offer presence, a quiet reminder that they, too, are enough. And that, you see, is often the greatest healing of all, to be reminded that nothing is missing. This realization begins to dissolve fear. Fear thrives on separation. It feeds on the illusion that there is something outside you that can destroy what you are. But when you see that life and death, gain and loss, are movements of the same ocean, what is there to fear? The wave cannot fall out of the sea. It may rise and fall, but it never ceases to be water. Imagine for a moment a leaf floating down a stream. The leaf does not resist the current. It does not complain about where it is taken. It moves gracefully, not because it understands the river's path, but because it trusts the flow. You, too, can live this way. You can let yourself be carried, not by resignation, but by participation. You move with life instead of against it, and in doing so, discover that the current was never against you. As this understanding deepens, even suffering begins to look different. You stop asking, why me? And begin to wonder, what is this showing me? The pain doesn't vanish, but its meaning changes. It becomes a teacher, not an enemy. It softens the edges of the self, humbles the ego, opens the heart. You begin to see that the cracks are not signs of failure. They are the spaces through which the light enters. In time, even the idea of awakening fades. You no longer measure yourself against spiritual ideals or compare your progress to anyone else's. You simply live. You laugh when it's funny. You cry when it hurts. You fall. You rise. You begin again. You stop trying to be spiritual and start being human, which, ironically, is the most spiritual thing of all. The sages were never superhuman beings. They simply stopped pretending to be anything else. They embraced their humanity so fully that it became transparent, allowing the infinite to shine through it. To live like this is to understand that divinity is not somewhere else, waiting to be reached. It's here, looking out from behind your eyes, breathing through your lungs, pulsing in your veins. This is the quiet revolution of awareness. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or revelation. It arrives gently, like dawn through a half-open window. It changes everything by changing nothing, for it reveals that nothing needed changing. The self you were trying to fix was never broken. The world you were trying to save was never lost. To see this clearly is to rest at last. Not the rest of exhaustion, but the rest of arrival. You realize you've been home all along. Every detour, every mistake, every heartbreak was part of the journey back to what never moved. You laugh softly at the irony of it all, and in that laughter, a great peace arises. It's not the peace of escape, but the peace of inclusion. You can finally say yes to all of it, the confusion, the clarity, the birth, the death, the gain, the loss. You see that life's perfection is not in its smoothness, but in its completeness. It holds everything, and that wholeness is love. And so, you walk differently now. You no longer rush. You no longer grasp. You no longer wait for permission to be alive. You move through the world as a presence rather than a person, as an awareness rather than a role. And wherever you go, something silent and beautiful goes with you, reminding all who meet you that they, too, have never been lost. And then there comes a kind of quiet after the knowing, not the quiet of emptiness, but of fullness, as though life has finally exhaled and found itself resting in its own rhythm. You wake one morning and realize there is nothing left to search for. The seeking, the striving, even the idea of becoming someone better dissolves like mist in sunlight. You see, the moment you stop trying to arrive anywhere, you discover that you have always been here. This is the final unfolding of the journey, not a destination, but an absorption. The wave returns to the ocean, not by effort, but by remembering it was never apart. You, too, begin to live with that same natural ease. You no longer ask life for meaning, because you have become meaning itself. Everything you touch, everything you see, reflects the same still intelligence that lives within you. You start to laugh at the absurdity of the game we all play, the endless chase for validation, the frantic pursuit of success, the anxious clinging to permanence. You see it now as a cosmic dance, a play where the actors have simply forgotten it's a play. And rather than feeling superior or detached, you feel tenderness, because you remember what it was like to be caught in the script, to take every line so seriously. Compassion deepens, not as a virtue, but as understanding. You begin to notice that the boundaries between you and life are melting. The wind moves, and it feels like your breath. The rain falls, and it feels like your tears. Someone smiles on the street, and it feels like your own joy shining back at you. It's as if the whole world has turned into a mirror, reflecting only one truth. There was never two. And what becomes of fear in such a place? It loses its hold. Not because you have conquered it, but because you see through it. You see that fear was always a shadow cast by your forgetting. When you remember who you are, fear has nothing left to cling to. You realize that the great mystery of life has never been against you. It was only waiting for your cooperation. This doesn't make you invincible or indifferent. You still feel pain, you still grieve, you still stumble, but now there's a softness around it all, a kind of quiet trust that runs through every experience. You understand that sorrow and joy are not opposites, but two notes in the same song. You don't try to hold one or escape the other. You let them both play through you. And in that harmony, something timeless begins to hum. You realize that even death, that great unspoken fear, is not an ending but a rhythm, a return. It's the breath of the cosmos inhaling again. What you truly are cannot die because it was never born. It only takes form for a little while, to taste itself, to play. And when the play ends, it bows and becomes the stage once more. This understanding doesn't make you distant from the world. Quite the opposite. It draws you closer. You love more deeply, laugh more freely, forgive more easily. You no longer need to protect yourself from life, because you have recognized that you are life. Every moment becomes a prayer without words, an act of worship without worshipers. It's funny how we spend so much of our lives trying to control what was never ours. We fight the current, build walls, wear masks, and then one day you realize you don't have to do any of that anymore. You can let the river carry you. You can let the walls fall. You can let the masks drop. You can finally breathe. And in that breath, the world breathes with you. The trees sway in rhythm. The birds call in response. Even the silence feels alive. You begin to feel a subtle joy that asks for nothing, that depends on nothing. It's the joy of simply being. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be protected because it cannot be taken away. You look back at your life, all the mistakes, the detours, the heartbreaks, and you see the hidden intelligence woven through it all. Every fall was a doorway. Every delay, a redirection. Every ending, a beginning in disguise. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was wrong. It was all part of the unfolding, the remembering. And as you sit quietly, watching the sun dip below the horizon, you feel no need to hold on to it. No sorrow that it's fading, because you know it will rise again. Not because of belief, but because of rhythm. The same rhythm that moves your breath, that beats your heart, that carries the tides of the sea and the stories of your life. To live this way is not to transcend the human experience, but to be fully immersed in it without being consumed by it. You can taste the salt of tears and still smile. You can watch the seasons change without wishing them to stay. You can love without fear of loss, because you understand that love itself never leaves, only its forms change. This is what it means to awaken. Not to escape the dream, but to dream consciously. To know you are both the dreamer and the dream. You live in the world, but you are no longer bound by it. You participate in the drama, but you no longer mistake the stage for reality. You have come home to yourself, and in doing so, you have come home to the universe. And perhaps that's the most beautiful realization of all, that you were never lost, never broken, never unworthy. You were simply playing hide and seek with eternity, waiting for the moment when you would stop searching and start seeing. Now you see, and seeing, you smile. Because the great secret, the one that sages have whispered through time, is beautifully simple. You are already what you seek. So you walk on, not to arrive, but to express, not to find meaning, but to reveal it. And as you walk, the universe walks with you, endlessly unfolding, endlessly returning, endlessly free. There comes a point in nearly every life when faith in any form begins to crumble. It doesn't matter whether you call it faith in God, faith in people, faith in progress, or even faith in yourself. There comes a moment when all of it feels absurd, when the world appears to spin without reason, and you stand at the center wondering what on earth any of this is for. And you see, that is a very revealing place to arrive at, because the loss of faith is not the end of the spiritual journey. It is the beginning of it. We grow up believing that faith is something we must cling to, something we must protect from doubt like a fragile flame in a storm. But real faith does not need protection. Real faith is what remains when all beliefs have collapsed. For what you call belief is often only certainty dressed in spiritual clothing, and certainty is brittle, like glass. The moment life becomes unpredictable, it shatters. So what happens when your life stops making sense? When the things you trusted, religion, success, relationships, your very sense of purpose, seem hollow or even cruel. Most people panic. They rush to replace one belief with another. They switch religions, chase new philosophies, or drown themselves in distractions. But the wise do something very strange. They stop running. They stand still in the darkness and let the questions echo, because they know that doubt is not the enemy of faith. It is its purifier. You see, to lose faith is to lose the false ground on which you once stood. And that can feel like dying, because in a sense, it is. The self that you believed was secure, the one that thought it understood what life was, begins to dissolve. But what dies is not you. It is only the illusion that you ever knew what you were doing here. Faith, when it is real, is not a belief that things will be fine. It is the recognition that things already are fine, even when they appear chaotic. The universe is not obliged to make sense to the human mind. And the moment you stop demanding that it should, you begin to see that it is not senseless at all, it is simply vast. When we lose faith, what we are really losing is the idea that life should serve our understanding. We forget that the mind is not the master of life, but its expression. The mind is like a mirror, reflecting what appears before it. But we try to make it a sculptor, carving out meaning, demanding control, demanding permanence. And when reality refuses to conform, we call it meaningless. Yet the absurdity we feel is not in life itself, it is in our insistence that it must fit our definitions. Look carefully and you will see that every crisis of faith is an invitation to look without a map. And that is terrifying, because the map gives us the illusion of direction. We like to think we are on our way somewhere toward enlightenment, success, redemption. But what if the road itself is the destination? What if there is nowhere to arrive, nothing to prove, no cosmic verdict waiting at the end of time? The loss of faith strips away your idols one by one. It shows you that the gods you worshipped, your ideals, your philosophies, your achievements, were always carved from the same stone of thought. And when the stone cracks, you begin to see the emptiness beneath. That emptiness is not a void to fear. It is the space from which life itself emerges. When you lose faith, the ground beneath you disappears because it was never there to begin with. You realize that you have been walking on air the entire time. You begin to laugh, not because the situation is funny, but because you see how absurdly serious you've been about something that was never under your control. Life has never depended on your faith in it. It moves, breathes, and unfolds entirely on its own. The stars are not burning because you believe in them. The waves do not crash upon the shore because you understand the ocean. Life simply is, and your faith or lack of it has nothing to do with its being. This realization is both humbling and liberating. It humbles you because it shows that you were never the center of the story. But it liberates you because it means the story does not depend on you to continue. Losing faith is not a curse. It is a sacred disillusionment. The illusion that dies is the one that whispered, "You must know what this means." And when that illusion dies, what remains is raw experience, the taste of existence without interpretation, the rain falling without reason, the silence that follows your last question, the simple awareness that you are here, breathing, feeling, being. And then something extraordinary happens. In the very moment you stop trying to believe, you begin to see, not with the eyes of the intellect, but with the eyes of presence. You see that faith was never meant to be a belief. It was meant to be a way of seeing. So when you find yourself saying, "I've lost faith in life," pause for a moment. Notice that life has not lost faith in you. The sun still rises, the earth still turns, your heart still beats. Something larger than your understanding is carrying you even through this despair. And that, my friends, is the quiet beginning of real faith. Because faith, when it is pure, is not a conclusion, it is participation. It is the willingness to live without answers and to still marvel at the mystery. It is the courage to trust that what is unfolding is not happening to you, but through you. And when you reach that understanding, when you finally see that losing faith is the invitation to experience life without filters, you begin to see that what you called loss was only the breaking of a shell. Inside that shell, life itself has always been waiting, free, eternal, and complete. When you have truly lost faith, you are standing in a kind of spiritual silence. It is not comfortable at first. The mind screams for meaning. It wants the old symbols back, the gods, the promises, the goals. It wants the ground it used to walk upon. But silence, if you allow it, begins to reveal something extraordinary. You begin to sense that the meaning you were chasing was never out there waiting to be found. It was always in the act of looking itself. The very energy that drove you to seek purpose was the same pulse that creates suns and galaxies. You were never separated from meaning. You were meaning happening in human form. This is why despair can be such a sacred teacher. It is the gate through which the false self cannot pass. Every philosophy, every religion, every grand certainty eventually collapses under the weight of reality. Because life is too vast to fit inside a system of thought. And when your system collapses, you are not left with nothing, you are left with everything. You may have noticed that the people who seem most at peace are not those who have all the answers, but those who have stopped needing them. They laugh easily, They move freely. They are not anxious about being right. It's not that they've discovered some grand secret, it's that they have made peace with not knowing. They have learned to rest in the mystery instead of trying to solve it. You see, losing faith is not about losing your connection to life. It's about losing your illusion of separation. It's about realizing that life was never something happening to you, it was always happening as you. And when that realization dawns, it doesn't come as a thought. It comes as a feeling, a subtle warmth, a quiet recognition that you have always been home. Imagine a wave in the ocean, convinced that it is lost because it no longer feels the security of being near the shore. It forgets that it was never separate from the ocean in the first place. The wave cannot be lost because it is the ocean moving in form. You are that wave. The loss you feel is the ocean reminding you of what you are made of. When we lose faith, what actually happens is that the ego loses its foothold. The part of you that wanted life to serve its plans finally surrenders. You begin to see that life doesn't need your permission to unfold. And in that surrender, a space opens, a stillness that allows reality to be just as it is. That stillness is not apathy, it is awareness. Faith returns then, not as belief, but as trust. Not the trust that everything will go your way, but the trust that even when it doesn't, you are still a part of something immeasurably whole. It is like falling backward into the arms of the universe and discovering they were never not there. What you begin to realize is that life is not a riddle to be solved, but a song to be heard. You don't stand outside it, trying to decode the melody. You are one of the notes. The loss of faith becomes a deep listening, a return to the rhythm you had forgotten while trying so hard to understand the music. Look at a child playing in the sand. There is no agenda there, no doctrine, no search for purpose, and yet the play itself is full of purpose. Life in its purest form is self-fulfilling. The ocean waves not to reach the shore, but because waving is its nature. The stars do not shine to illuminate something else. They shine because shining is what they are. And when you understand this, you realize that you, too, are an expression of life being what it is. You begin to see that even your doubts, your losses, your long nights of the soul are part of that same dance. The darkness is not against the light, it defines it. Without doubt, faith would have no depth. Without loss, love would have no tenderness. Without death, life would have no urgency. Everything that frightened you was secretly working in your favor, shaping you into someone who could finally see without filters. And so the true purpose of faith is not to escape suffering, but to see through it, to look pain in the eyes and realize that even it belongs. When the rain falls, it doesn't ask whether it is doing the right thing. It simply falls. When the wind blows, it doesn't question its direction. It moves, because that is what wind does. And when you lose faith, you too are simply passing through a natural season of the soul. Every human being will face this moment in some form. The mystics called it the dark night. The philosophers called it existential despair. But in truth, it is the same event the moment life strips you bare of all false meanings so that you may encounter the real one. And what is the real one? It cannot be said. Because the moment you say it, you turn it into a concept. But you can feel it like a quiet hum beneath everything that happens. It is the stillness between your thoughts, the pause before laughter, the silence that holds every sound. That silence, that hum, that awareness, that is faith itself. When you realize this, you stop searching for faith as something to hold on to. You begin to see that it was never lost. It only hid behind your attempts to define it. The divine, if you wish to call it that, is not something you find at the end of a road. It is what has been looking through your eyes all along. So when you say, "I've lost faith in life," look again. You haven't lost faith. You've simply lost your ideas about what life should be. And in that loss lies the opportunity to discover what life is. It is not a story with a happy ending. It is not a test to be passed. It is not a puzzle to be solved. It is an ever-unfolding mystery that invites you to participate. You are not meant to believe in it. You are meant to be it. The loss of faith is the final invitation to stop pretending, to stop performing, and to start living. It is the beginning of intimacy with reality. And that intimacy, once it awakens, is the quietest, most unshakable form of faith there is. For the one who has truly lost faith in life does not need to find it again. He realizes that life never asked for his faith in the first place. Life only asked him to see.
Here we are, staring at something that has troubled spiritual men and women for thousands of years. This battle with lust. And the strange thing is, the more awake you become, the more conscious of the divine, the fiercer this battle seems to grow. Why is that? Why should the person who seeks God most earnestly be the very one who wrestles most deeply with desire? Let me tell you what is happening here. And I must warn you, this is not the comfortable sermon you might expect. This is about seeing the whole picture, not just the parts we like to talk about in public. The first thing to understand is this: when you awaken spiritually, when you begin to see life as it truly is, you don't become less human. You become more human. You become more aware of everything. The divine, yes, but also the earthly. The sacred and the profane. The angelic and the animal. Think of it this way. Before awakening, you were like a person walking through life half asleep. Your senses were dulled. Your awareness was clouded. But awakening is like turning up the volume on everything. Suddenly you can hear the birds singing more clearly. You can taste your food more vividly. You can feel the sun on your skin with greater intensity. And yes, you can feel desire more powerfully too. This is the first reason. Spiritual sensitivity amplifies everything. When you open your spiritual eyes, you don't just open them to heaven. You open them to the full spectrum of human experience. The same sensitivity that lets you feel God's presence also makes you more aware of the body's yearnings. The same consciousness that perceives divine beauty also perceives earthly beauty with shocking intensity. The old religious teachers often missed this point. They thought awakening would make you less aware of the flesh. But it's exactly the opposite. A spiritually awake person feels everything more deeply. Joy and sorrow, peace and restlessness, love and lust. The heightened state of awareness that comes with spiritual growth doesn't shut down your humanity. It turns up the dial on all of it. So here you are, a person seeking God, and suddenly you find yourself feeling desire more intensely than ever before. And you think something has gone wrong. You think you're falling backward. But actually, you're just becoming more alive, more aware, more fully human. The question is not how to stop feeling. The question is how to be with what you feel without being controlled by it. Now let's look at the second reason. And this one is painful to admit. Those who are spiritually awake often find themselves alone, not because they're better than others, but because they see things differently. They can't engage in the usual conversations anymore. The gossip feels hollow. The endless chatter about nothing feels unbearable. The obsession with status and money and appearances seems like children playing make-believe. And so they drift away from the crowd. Or the crowd drifts away from them. Either way, they end up alone. And loneliness is a very particular kind of hunger, when you have no one to share your thoughts with. When you have no one who understands the things you're seeing. When you're carrying visions and insights that others would think mad, you feel isolated in a way that cuts deep. Lust becomes a kind of bridge back to human connection. Even if it's false connection, even if it's empty connection, at least it's something. At least for a moment you're not alone. The body pressed against another body.
The eyes meeting another's eyes. For that brief time, the terrible loneliness lifts. Do you see the trap? The very path that leads you closer to truth also leads you further from the crowd. And the human animal in you cries out for contact, for touch, for the warmth of another. Lust offers a counterfeit solution. It promises connection but delivers only more isolation. Because after the moment passes, you're still alone, often more alone than before. This is why so many spiritual seekers, so many monks and mystics and holy men and women throughout history have struggled in secret with desire. They withdrew from the world to seek God. And they found God, yes, but they also found crushing loneliness. And lust came knocking at the door of that loneliness, offering companionship, even if only for an hour. The third reason is perhaps the most mysterious. When you begin to wake up spiritually, you become a threat. Not to people necessarily, though sometimes to them too. But you become a threat to the forces that keep humanity asleep. Call them what you will. Demons, if you like. The powers of darkness. Or simply the momentum of unconsciousness that governs most human life. Whatever you call these forces, they do not want you awake. They do not want you seeing clearly. They do not want you spreading consciousness to others. And so they attack. They probe for weaknesses. They look for ways to pull you back into the dream, back into the trance, back into the endless cycle of grasping and wanting and never being satisfied. Lust is a magnificent weapon for this purpose. Why? Because it works. It really does pull people back into unconsciousness. When you're caught in the grip of lust, when desire is burning through you, you cannot think clearly, you cannot meditate, you cannot pray, you cannot rest in that quiet inner space where God speaks. You are pulled entirely into the body, into sensation, into the fever of wanting something right now. And so the attacks come, stronger and stronger as you grow in awareness. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're doing something right. You're waking up. And the forces of sleep do not give up their prisoners without a fight. This is what the scriptures mean when they speak of spiritual warfare. It's not a metaphor. It's not poetry. It's the actual experience of anyone who tries to live consciously in an unconscious world. The battle is real. The enemy is real. And lust is one of his favorite weapons because it works so terribly well. The fourth reason is about wounds. Old wounds. Deep wounds. Wounds we carry from childhood. From rejection. From betrayal. From all the ways life has hurt us before we even knew what was happening. Most people walk through life never looking at these wounds. They're too painful, too frightening. But when you begin to wake up spiritually, you start seeing them. You start feeling them. All the old pain rises to the surface. The abandonment, the shame, the fear of not being loved, the conviction that you're not enough. And here's what happens. Lust offers to soothe these wounds. It offers a temporary balm. When you're in the grip of desire, when you're pursuing or being pursued, you forget the pain for a while. You feel wanted. You feel alive. You feel like maybe, just maybe, you are enough after all. But it's a lie. Lust doesn't heal wounds. It just covers them up for a moment. Like putting a bandage on a festering sore without cleaning it first. The infection remains, and often grows worse, because now you've added shame to the wound. Now you've added the knowledge that you're using people, or being used, or both. Now you've added another layer of pain on top of the original pain. The spiritually awake person sees all of this. They see the wound. They see the lust rising to cover it. They see the shame that follows. They see the whole cycle. And seeing it doesn't make it stop. Sometimes seeing it makes it worse. Because now you're aware of what you're doing even while you're doing it. You're conscious of the trap, even as you step into it. Healing these old wounds requires something else entirely. It requires facing them, sitting with them, letting them be felt without running away into distraction or comfort or false connection. This is hard work. the hardest work there is. And many people, even spiritually awakened people, would rather battle lust than do this deeper work of healing. Because at least lust offers moments of pleasure, however brief. The work of healing offers only pain, at least at first. The fifth reason is the most paradoxical of all. The very gifts that make you spiritually powerful also make you vulnerable. When you have heightened sensitivity, when you can feel the divine presence, when you can sense the interconnection of all things, you're operating at a very high frequency. Your consciousness is expanded. Your awareness is vast. But you're still in a body. You're still flesh and blood. You're still subject to all the drives and hungers and needs of the animal self. And here's the strange thing. The higher your consciousness rises, the stronger the pull downward becomes. It's as if the universe seeks balance, as if the very expansion of your spiritual nature creates an equal and opposite pull toward the purely physical. This is why so many spiritual teachers, so many gifted healers and prophets and visionaries have fallen into scandals of the flesh. Not because they were hypocrites, not because their spiritual gifts were fake, but because the combination of high spiritual power and unguarded physical nature creates a dangerous situation. Like a tall building without a foundation. The higher it rises, the more catastrophic the fall. The answer to this is discipline. But not the grim teeth-gritting kind of discipline that feels like punishment. Rather, the discipline of tending to the whole self, spirit and body, mind and flesh. You cannot just soar in the spiritual realms and ignore the needs of the body. You cannot just pray and meditate and expect the physical nature to take care of itself. The body needs to be honored, fed properly, exercised, given rest, given healthy touch and connection, given creative expression. When these needs are met in healthy ways, lust has less power. When they're ignored or denied, lust becomes overwhelming because it's trying to fill too many holes at once. So what do we do with all of this? How do we live with this strange combination of heightened spiritual awareness and powerful physical desire? First, we stop pretending the battle doesn't exist. We stop acting as if spiritual people are supposed to float above all this earthly messiness. The flesh is real. Desire is real. And fighting a real enemy requires acknowledging it's there. Second, we stop fighting alone. The isolation I spoke of earlier is part of the trap. Lust thrives in secrecy. It grows in darkness, when we can find even one other person to be honest with. Someone who won't judge us but will stand with us. The power of lust begins to break. Not because confession is magic, but because isolation is what feeds the beast. Third, we attend to the wounds. This means sitting with the pain instead of running from it. This means feeling the loneliness instead of medicating it with false connection. This means looking at the old rejections and abandonments and letting them be seen and acknowledged. It's painful work, but it's the only work that actually heals. Fourth, we practice presence with our desire without acting on it. This is perhaps the hardest practice of all. When lust rises, the instinct is to either indulge it or suppress it. Both of these are forms of violence. Indulging it leads to shame and emptiness. Suppressing it leads to explosion later. The middle way is to simply be present with the feeling. To feel the heat of desire without having to do anything about it. To notice how it rises and falls like a wave. To observe it the way you might watch a storm from a safe place. This takes tremendous courage. But it's in this space of presence without action that real transformation happens. Not because you're fighting the desire, but because you're neither fighting it nor feeding it. You're just watching it. And in the watching, something shifts. Finally, we remember that we are not this battle. We are not the desire or the shame or the struggle. We are the awareness within which all of this arises. Like the sky that watches the weather pass through. The storms come and go. The clouds gather and disperse. But the sky remains unchanged. When you can rest in this awareness, even for a moment, The battle loses its power to define you. Yes, lust may still arise. Yes, the struggle may continue, but you're no longer identified with it. You're no longer convinced that this struggle is who you are. The spiritually awake struggle with lust not because they're failing, but because they're awake enough to feel the full force of being human. They're sensitive enough to feel every current, every drive, every hunger. And they're isolated enough to face these things often without support or understanding. But this struggle, as painful as it is, can become a teacher. It can show us where we're wounded and need healing. It can reveal our need for real human connection, not false substitutes. It can humble us, reminding us that we're not as far above the flesh as we might like to think. And it can deepen our compassion for every other human being struggling with their own desires and weaknesses. The battle with lust is not a sign that you're spiritually failing. It's often a sign that you're spiritually growing into a fuller awareness of what it means to be both spirit and flesh, both divine and animal, both awakened and still very much in the process of learning what that awakening means. So be gentle with yourself. Be honest about the struggle. Seek help when you need it. Attend to your wounds. Practice presence with your desires without being controlled by them. And remember, always remember, that you are not alone in this battle. Every mystic, every saint, every truly awakened person has walked this same difficult path. The flesh is weak, yes, but the spirit, there's something happening to you right now that you can't quite name. And I need to tell you something about it that might be difficult to hear. This feeling you're carrying, this strange place you're in, it's not a waiting room. It's not preparation. It's not the space before your life begins. It's the most dangerous phase of your entire journey. Dangerous because most people don't survive it. Not physically, but they abandon themselves here. They quit here. They convince themselves the vision was never real. And they do it right before everything was about to change. You clicked on this video not for entertainment, not to pass the time. You clicked because something inside you is looking for confirmation. Confirmation that this feeling, this strange mixture of certainty and confusion, isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. Let me tell you what I think is actually happening. You can see it. The life you're supposed to be living. The person you're supposed to become. It's not a vague dream anymore. It's specific. It's detailed. You can almost touch it. And that's precisely what makes your current reality so unbearable. Because you're standing here, and that future is standing over there, and the distance between the two feels like it might kill you. Some days you wake up and there's this electricity running through you. Everything feels possible. You make decisions from that future place, bold decisions, and for a few hours you inhabit that version of yourself completely. But then something shifts. Maybe by afternoon, maybe by the next morning, and suddenly you're back in the weight of what is. The bank account that doesn't reflect your vision, the people around you who don't see what you see, the evidence, or lack of it, that anything is actually working. And you think there's something wrong with this. You think the oscillation means you're unstable, unfocused, not cut out for this. But I want to tell you something that might change everything. This is the place. This exact experience you're having right now, this is the most important phase of your entire journey. And here's what nobody tells you about it. You will never need to be here again. This is a one-time passage. A threshold you cross once and only once. Which is why most people don't recognize it while they're in it. They think it's a waiting room. They think it's the space before their life begins. It's not. This is where your life is actually being decided. Let me explain what's really happening when you feel like you're living in two realities at once. There's the reality everyone else can see, the one with the struggle, the building, the waiting, the not yet. This is the reality that shows up in your circumstances. The reality you have to explain to people. The reality that makes you feel like you're behind. And then there's the reality you feel, the one where the future version of you isn't imaginary at all. It's more real than what's in front of you. You can feel that person's confidence, their calm, their certainty. You know how they think. You know how they move through the world. And on your best days, you make decisions from that place. But here's the problem with existing in two timelines simultaneously. When that future self feels close, you feel invincible. You take risks. You speak differently. You carry yourself like someone who has already arrived. But when the present self reasserts its weight, when you look around and see only the gap, something in you collapses. You feel like a fraud, like you've been pretending, like the distance between where you are and where you're going is a distance you specifically cannot cross. This whiplash isn't a malfunction. This is what transformation actually feels like from the inside. You see, we have this idea that growth is linear, that you start at point A, you work hard, and you arrive at point B, and the whole journey is a steady upward climb. But that's not how it works. That's not how it's ever worked for anyone who has genuinely transformed their life. The actual pattern looks more like this: a surge forward, then what feels like a collapse, an expansion, then a contraction, a day where you feel like you've finally broken through, followed by a week where you feel like you've lost everything you gained. And in those low moments, in those contractions, you don't just question the path, you question yourself. You wonder if the vision was ever real or just a story you told yourself to avoid facing your limitations. But here's what I need you to understand. The contraction isn't the loss of progress. The contraction is the integration of progress. It's your system catching up to what you've become. It's the space where the growth actually takes root. Think of it like a muscle after intense exercise. There's a period where it feels weaker, not stronger, where it needs rest and recovery. But that period isn't the undoing of the workout. It's where the workout actually becomes part of you. Your psychology works the same way. And if you keep interpreting the contractions as failure, if you keep using those low moments as evidence that you're not meant for this, you will walk away right before the integration completes. This is why most people quit when they do. Not because they weren't close, but because being close feels worse than being far away. Now let me tell you what it actually means to be ready, because you've probably been misunderstanding this your entire life. You think being ready means feeling ready. You think it means having confidence, having clarity, having some kind of stable internal state that doesn't waver. And so you wait. You wait for the doubt to go away. You wait to feel certain. You wait for the fear to stop. But that's not what readiness is. That's not what it's ever been. Readiness is what you do when you don't feel ready. It's the action you take on the morning when everything in you is screaming to stay in bed. It's the work you do when there's no external evidence that the work is leading anywhere. It's choosing the hard right thing over the easy wrong thing when nobody is watching and nobody will ever know. This is what preparation actually looks like. Not motivation. Not inspiration. Just the decision to keep going when every feeling you have is telling you to stop. And here's what you need to hear. You've been doing this. You've been showing up on those days. You've been taking action without proof. And you're probably not giving yourself any credit for it because you're too focused on how far you still have to go. But the distance you've already traveled, the internal ground you've already covered, that's not nothing. That's everything. Because most people never start. And of those who start, most people quit during the exact phase you're in right now. You're still here. That's not a small thing. You've been so focused on what you haven't done that you've forgotten to acknowledge what you have. The mornings you got up anyway. The work you did when you didn't want to. The times you chose the vision over the comfort. Nobody saw those moments. Nobody applauded, but they happened. And they're the reason you're still in this. The fatigue you feel, the heaviness, that's not a sign you're failing. It's the weight of becoming. You're carrying two versions of yourself right now. The old one that's dissolving and the new one that's forming. And that's exhausting. Of course it is. But it doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something is happening. But there's a voice, isn't there? A voice that speaks loudest in the quiet moments. When you're trying to fall asleep. When you're alone with your thoughts. When the distraction stops and you're left with yourself. And this voice asks a question that feels like a knife. What if it never happens for you? And you think this voice is your enemy. You think it's the thing you need to defeat before you can succeed. You try to silence it with affirmations. You try to drown it out with motivation. You try to argue with it, to present evidence, to build a case for why it's wrong. But what if that voice isn't trying to stop you? What if it's trying to test you? You see, there's something that happens when a person commits to a path that will genuinely transform them. The commitment gets tested. Not once, but repeatedly. And the tests don't come from outside. They come from within. They come in the form of doubt, exhaustion, the seductive logic of giving up. And every time you feel that voice rising, every time you hear the question, what if this isn't for you? You're not being attacked. You're being asked. You're being asked, do you actually want this? Or do you just like the idea of wanting it? And here's how you answer. Not with words, not with affirmations, not with arguments. You answer by what you do next. If this were just a fantasy, you would have found an easier story by now. You would have negotiated yourself into something more comfortable, something with less resistance, something that didn't require you to keep walking into uncertainty every single day. But you're still here, still asking when, not if. And that tells me something about you that you might not see in yourself. You have faith, not the clean kind, not the comfortable kind. A messy faith, a faith that coexists with doubt, that gets shaky and uncertain, that sometimes feels more like stubbornness than belief. A faith that doesn't feel like faith at all because it's wrapped in so much questioning. But it's faith nonetheless, because you're still in the game. You haven't walked away. And that means somewhere inside you, deeper than the doubt, there's a knowing that won't let you quit. That knowing is the only proof you need. I want you to understand something about the people who have made it to the other side, the ones living the life you're building toward, the ones who turned their vision into reality. They all stood exactly where you're standing, every single one of them. I spoke with a woman once who built a company that now serves thousands of people. I asked her about the early days, expecting to hear about strategy, vision, the blueprint she followed. She laughed. The early days, she said, were just me crying in my car before client calls, convinced everyone would find out I had no idea what I was doing, and then making the call anyway. That's what the in-between looked like for her. Not confidence, not clarity, just action in the absence of both. They had the same vision and the same gap you have. They had days of electricity and days of collapse. They questioned whether they were the exception to the rule, the one for whom it wouldn't work. They looked at their circumstances and couldn't see how it would happen. They felt the weight, the fatigue, the voice asking, what's the point? And they kept going. Not because they had more confidence than you, not because they had more talent or connections or luck. They kept going because they refused to let the doubt make the decision. The doubt was there. It's always there. It never fully goes away, not even after you've made it. But they acted anyway. They treated the doubt as information, not as instruction. They felt the fear and moved their feet regardless. And that's the only difference. The only difference between the ones who made it and the ones who didn't. The ones who made it let action decide. So I want to offer you something. A different way of measuring where you are. A different way of knowing whether you're on track. Stop measuring your progress by how you feel. I know that sounds strange. We're taught to check in with ourselves, to monitor our emotional state, to use our feelings as a compass. And in many areas of life, that's wise. But in this phase, in the between, your feelings will lie to you. Your feelings will fluctuate based on how much sleep you got, what you ate, what someone said to you, what you saw on your phone, how the weather is, whether you're getting sick. Your feelings will tell you you're failing on the same day you're actually breaking through. Your feelings will tell you to quit 10 minutes before the breakthrough arrives. Feelings are data, but they're not accurate data. Not right now. Not in this phase. So stop asking yourself how you feel about your progress. Start asking different questions. Did you show up today? That's progress. Did you take one action, however small, toward the thing you're building? That's progress. Did you choose not to quit when quitting would have been easier? That's progress. Did you resist the urge to burn it all down and start something new just because the current thing got hard? That's progress. Because this phase isn't measured in breakthroughs. This phase is measured in consistency, in the decision to keep walking when you can't see the path, in the choice to stay in the game when every logical part of your brain is telling you to find an easier game. And by that measure, by the only measure that actually matters right now, you're already succeeding. You just can't see it yet. Here's what I want you to see about where you are. Imagine you're in a forest. Dense, unfamiliar, no map, no trail markers, no sense of which direction leads out. And you have only two options, move or stay still. So you pick a direction and start walking. And after a while, you hit a dead end. So you adjust, you try another way. And that's not quite right either. You keep moving, keep adjusting, keep hitting walls and finding new paths. Now, you could interpret this as failure. You could say, I keep choosing wrong, I keep wasting time, I'm not good at navigating. Someone else would have found the way out by now. But that would be a misunderstanding. Because every wrong direction you've taken has taught you something, it's eliminated a possibility, it's sharpened your instincts, it's built your capacity to read the terrain. You're not lost because you're incompetent. You're in a place that can only be crossed by moving through it. There is no map for the in-between. There never was. The people who made it through didn't have better directions. They just kept moving when they couldn't see where they were going. The forest isn't punishing you. The forest is training you, and the training is the point. I want to tell you something that might be difficult to hear, but I think you need to hear it. This phase you're in, this between, this is not preparation for your life. This is your life, and it might be the most alive you'll ever feel. Because right now you have hunger, you have direction, you have something you're building toward, something that matters to you. You have skin in the game. You're not comfortable, and that discomfort is keeping you sharp, keeping you moving, keeping you becoming. And I know you're waiting for the other side, waiting for the moment when you've arrived and you can finally relax into what you've built. But I need to tell you something about that moment. It doesn't end the uncertainty. It just changes the game. The stakes get higher. The problems get different. The doubt doesn't disappear. It just learns new questions to ask. The people who have made it will tell you the same thing. They'll tell you that the hunger you feel now, the aliveness of building something from nothing, that never comes back the same way. Once you've arrived, you can't unarrive. And many of them miss this phase. They miss the rawness of it, the intensity, the feeling that everything was still possible because nothing was yet decided. So if you're waiting to feel successful before you let yourself appreciate this, if you're postponing your experience of the journey until you've reached the destination, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss the part where you were most alive. So here's what I want to leave you with. The fact that you're still here, the fact that you clicked on this video looking for something you couldn't name, the fact that these words are landing somewhere inside you, that's not an accident. Something in you recognized this. Something in you needed to hear that the place you're in isn't a mistake, that the struggle isn't a sign you're on the wrong path, that the doubt doesn't disqualify you. And the only confirmation you need isn't out there somewhere. It's not in a sign or a signal or someone else's approval. It's in here. It's in the fact that you refuse to stop, that you keep getting back up, that no matter how many times the voice asks if it's worth it, you keep answering with your actions. That's not weakness dressed up as strength. That's strength, the only kind that matters. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Not for me, for yourself, say it out loud, or write it where you'll see it, or post it somewhere others can witness it. 3 words, I keep walking. That's it. That's the whole thing. Because in this phase, that's the only declaration.
There are moments, sometimes quiet, sometimes aching, when one looks over the shoulder of time and wonders what it was all for. You wake up one day and realize that years have passed, and somehow the grand story you thought you were writing seems to have slipped through your fingers. Perhaps you did everything you were told you should do. You worked hard, you stayed busy, you followed the path that others laid before you. Yet still, there is this haunting whisper that asks, was this it? It can be a very strange and lonely feeling, this sense that you have wasted something as sacred as your own life. Because you see, we are all taught that life is something to be used, something to be directed toward a purpose, something that must amount to something in the end. And so we chase after the idea of meaning like a man chasing his own shadow. But the more you run after it, the further it seems to recede. This idea of waste only appears when we measure life by a story we believe it should have followed. You were supposed to be somewhere by now. You were supposed to have done something, become someone, proven something, and yet here you are, standing still, looking at the world, and feeling as if everyone else is moving ahead while you are being quietly left behind. But the strange thing about that feeling is that it never quite tells the truth. Because what if what you call wasting your life is only your life refusing to be wasted on the wrong things? What if your stillness is not failure, but rest? What if the roads you didn't take were simply the ones that were never yours to walk? You see, we live in a world obsessed with progress. Everything around us is designed to convince you that you must constantly be moving towards something, producing something, improving something, achieving something. But in that endless striving, you forget how to be. You forget that the meaning of life is not found at the end of a path, but in the simple act of walking. The oak tree does not rush to grow. The clouds do not hurry across the sky to arrive at a destination. And yet, we are convinced that stillness means stagnation, that silence means absence, that not knowing means failure. The idea that you have wasted your life is built on a comparison. You look at what others have done, what they have achieved, where they are, and then you measure your own existence against their imagined success. But comparison is a trick of the mind. It turns life into a contest, when in truth it was never a race at all. You are not running toward meaning, you are meaning unfolding. Consider this. If a flower were to bloom at midnight, hidden from every eye, would it still be beautiful? Would its fragrance be any less sweet because no one saw it? The flower does not bloom to be seen. It blooms because blooming is its nature. In the same way, your life does not need to be seen, measured, or admired to be worthwhile. You exist because the universe willed it so. And that, by itself, is enough. The feeling that life has been wasted often arises when the story you told yourself about who you were supposed to become begins to fall apart. But every story must dissolve for truth to appear. There comes a moment when the masks grow heavy, when the ambitions no longer excite you, when the old dreams start to feel like clothes that no longer fit. And that moment, though it feels like despair, is actually the beginning of something miraculous. It is the unraveling of illusion. For so long you believed you were on your way to somewhere, but where exactly? You were never truly going anywhere, because you were never truly separate from the place you longed to reach. You are already there. The journey was never about arriving. It was about realizing that you had been home all along. Many people come to this realization late in life, sometimes after decades of striving. They wake up one morning, see the lines on their face, the gray in their hair, and they think, what was it all for? They look at the possessions, the status, the roles they played, and none of it feels real anymore. And that can be a terrifying moment, but it can also be the first true breath of freedom you have ever taken. Because when you no longer believe you must become someone else to be worthy, you begin to live. Let me tell you a small story. There was once a monk who spent his entire life searching for enlightenment. He meditated for years, fasted, studied sacred texts, and traveled from teacher to teacher. Yet peace always seemed to elude him. One day, exhausted and old, he gave up. He sat beneath a tree and said to himself, I have wasted my life. But as he sat there, a gentle breeze passed through the leaves, and he noticed the sound of the wind, the sunlight flickering through the branches, the simple stillness of the world. In that moment, he began to laugh, because he realized that all along he had been searching for something that had never been lost. The same is true for you. You cannot waste your life any more than you can waste the sky. You may delay awareness, but the totality of life remains untouched by your choices. Even the mistakes, even the regrets, are part of the great unfolding. Nothing is outside of it. Nothing is wasted. You see, your idea of waste depends on your idea of time. You imagine a line, a past behind you and a future ahead, and you judge where you stand along that line. But time is not a line. It is a dance. The past is not gone. It is alive in you now as memory, as experience, as the invisible current shaping this very moment. The future is not waiting. It is already being born through your thoughts, your breath, your presence. And this moment, this one right now, is eternity disguised as now. So when you say, I have wasted my life, what you are really saying is, I have not noticed that life has always been here, because it has. It never went anywhere. Regret is the mind's way of trying to rewrite a story that was never yours to control. It is an echo of resistance, a refusal to accept the perfection of imperfection. But the moment you stop arguing with your past, the moment you allow every mistake to simply be part of the fabric of what made you, a quiet peace begins to emerge. That peace is not indifference. It is understanding. Perhaps you feel you spent too long in the wrong job, or loved the wrong person, or chased dreams that dissolved into dust. But what if none of that was wrong? What if each step, each heartbreak, each detour was essential in leading you to this very awareness? Life, after all, is not a straight path. It spirals, it loops, it doubles back, it confuses you on purpose so that you may eventually see the futility of trying to control it. And once you see that, a beautiful thing happens. You stop trying to win life. You begin to live it. The great error of modern man is that he measures his worth in productivity. You are not a machine. You are a mystery. You are not meant to function efficiently. You are meant to experience deeply. You are meant to feel the full weight of being alive, the joy, the loss, the uncertainty, the beauty, the grief. Every part of it is sacred. If you could only step back and see your life not as a series of failures or missed opportunities, but as a single piece of art, a painting in progress, you would realize that even the dark strokes are necessary for the light to shine. The contrast is what gives the picture depth. Perhaps you cannot see it now, but someday you will. You will look back and see that nothing was wasted. Every wrong turn led you home. Every heartbreak opened your heart a little wider. Every delay prepared you for what could not be rushed. The truth is that life cannot be wasted, because life is not a possession. You cannot lose what you never owned. You can only forget that it was never yours to control. So, if you feel you have wasted your life, I invite you to look closer. Look at the way the light falls on your hands. Look at the breath moving through your chest. Look at the small, miraculous act of awareness that allows you to even ask this question. This moment, right here, is your life, and it is whole. When you truly see that, something within you softens. The tension of regret begins to dissolve, and in its place comes a deep, unshakable peace. Not the peace of escape, but the peace of recognition. Because the truth is, you were never off track. There is no track. There is only this infinite unfolding, and you are part of it, now and forever. That is where healing begins. That is where the illusion of waste ends. When you begin to sense that perhaps nothing was wasted, the mind doesn't easily surrender its habit of measuring. It will try to find a new way to evaluate, a quieter scale upon which to weigh the worth of your days. It might whisper, all right, perhaps I didn't waste my life, but surely I should be further along by now. You see, even when you stop running, the mind still wants a finish line. But there isn't one. The idea of a finish line is born from the illusion that life is a journey from ignorance to enlightenment, from brokenness to wholeness, from lostness to foundness. But there was never such a line to cross. You were never incomplete. You were never missing anything. What you call growth, what you call progress, is simply the unfolding recognition of what has always been true. Yet the human being as it is, craves story. It needs to feel that it is going somewhere. That need gives us hope in dark hours, but it also creates a subtle prison. For as long as you believe there is somewhere you must arrive, you cannot rest here. You are always just a little bit away from home. So much of our suffering comes not from the past itself, but from our attempts to rewrite it. We imagine the alternate lives we could have lived, the choices we should have made, the people we might have been if only the cards had fallen differently. But these imagined lives are ghosts. They shimmer just beyond the reach of what's real. And every time you compare your actual life to those ghosts, you dishonor the sacredness of what actually is. You were never meant to be the best version of yourself. You were meant to be the only version of yourself. The perfection you seek is not in some ideal self-image, it's in the depth of the one that already lives and breathes within you. The truth is that the feeling of having wasted your life is an invitation, not a condemnation. It is a quiet knocking from the soul, asking to be seen, asking you to stop chasing, to stop proving, to stop trying so hard to be something. The exhaustion that follows years of striving is not evidence of failure. It is the body and spirit calling you home. And coming home to yourself can feel strange at first, almost unsettling, because the person you built in your mind, the one who was supposed to be accomplished, admired, certain, and strong, begins to crumble. What remains is someone far simpler, softer, more real, someone who does not need to pretend. There is a tenderness in that breaking, like the moment you realize the wave has always been the ocean. The separation was only imagined. And with that realization comes a strange, liberating humility. You begin to see that even your mistakes were not really yours. They were movements of the universe through the particular form you call me. Now, imagine standing on the shore of your own life. Behind you, the waves of memory crash and dissolve. Before you, the horizon stretches endlessly. You could spend your whole life staring backward, watching the ripples of what has been, or you could simply turn and face the open sea. Both choices are available, neither is wrong. But one keeps you bound to what has passed. The other invites you into the mystery that has always been waiting. This moment right now is not the sum of your past, nor the promise of your future. It is life in its purest form, unadorned, unmeasured, and utterly free. The trouble is that we rarely allow it to be enough. We clutter the present with demands for meaning, for validation, for proof that it matters. But meaning, my friend, is not something you give to life. It is what life gives to you when you stop asking it to explain itself. Look at the simple act of breathing. You inhale, and without effort, the universe enters you. You exhale, and you give yourself back to it. That rhythm has been happening your entire life, unnoticed, uncelebrated, perfectly balanced. You do not ask each breath what purpose it serves. You simply breathe. And yet, each breath sustains the miracle of your being. That is how life works. Meaning emerges not from what you do to it, but from what you allow it to show you. When you loosen your grip on the idea that your life must justify itself, something beautiful happens. The ordinary begins to shimmer. You notice the way sunlight falls on your table, the sound of distant laughter, the quiet pulse of your own heartbeat. And you realize, perhaps for the first time, that this unremarkable, unplanned, unspectacular moment is the essence of living. The modern world, however, does not reward this awareness. It worships noise. It values ambition over stillness, productivity over presence, attention over understanding. You are constantly being pulled away from yourself, told that you should be somewhere else, doing something else, becoming someone else. But the truth is that every time you abandon the present to chase a future, you deepen the illusion of waste. You create a gap where none exists. This is why so many people grow restless, even when they appear successful, because deep down, the soul cannot be satisfied with applause. It only longs for truth. And truth, unlike success, cannot be achieved. It can only be seen. When you begin to live with this seeing, your relationship to time begins to change. You stop asking, how much time do I have left? and start realizing that you are time. You are the eternal now, unfolding as this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. Life is not moving through you. You are life moving. The past, then, is not a weight to carry. It is a teacher. The mistakes you think ruined, you were actually sculpting you. The losses you grieve were making space for something new to arise. You thought you were being broken. You were being rearranged. You see, the universe wastes nothing. Not a leaf that falls, not a tear that drops, not a single heartbeat. Everything is used, everything transformed. You are part of that alchemy. So how could you have wasted your life when life itself wastes nothing? Sometimes the path seems meaningless only because you're standing too close to it. Like a painting, its beauty can only be seen when you take a few steps back. You must allow the years to settle, to merge, to reveal their hidden symmetry. Only then do you begin to see the pattern. Only then does the chaos make sense. And as you begin to see that pattern, gratitude quietly replaces regret. You realize that the very moments you despised, the loneliness, the failure, the confusion, were the ones that softened your heart. They broke the shell of who you thought you should be so that something vast and tender could shine through. So, you see, you did not waste your life. You were preparing to live it. And this living has nothing to do with success or legacy. It is about seeing the sacred in the simple, the way water moves, the way your hands age, the way a small kindness lingers long after it's given. These things, though small, are the pulse of eternity. But you must learn to stay with the moment, to stay with yourself, to stay with life even when it offers no grand answers. Because when you stay, you begin to notice that the feeling of emptiness was never emptiness at all, it was spaciousness. It was room for you to finally arrive. Now, some will ask, but what about purpose? Don't we all need one? And yes, in a way, purpose gives us direction, but direction is not the same as destination. Purpose is not something you find, it is something you express through being. The tree does not need a purpose to grow, its growing is its purpose. The bird does not need a reason to sing, its singing is its being, and so it is with you. Perhaps your greatest purpose is not to achieve anything at all, but to embody awareness so fully that life can experience itself through you. That may not sound grand, but it is divine. If you can see that even one day of your life, one seemingly wasted, uneventful, ordinary day was actually filled with this quiet divine presence, then the idea of waste collapses. Because what you were calling wasted time was actually eternity playing dress-up as delay. And if you can understand that, not just intellectually but inwardly, then a great peace will find you. Not the peace of resignation, but the peace of realization. The peace of knowing that you have never been outside of life's embrace. Everything that has ever happened, every failure, every detour, every regret was part of the unfolding of this awareness. It could not have been otherwise. When you truly see that, the ache of I have wasted my life begins to dissolve into a quiet smile, because you realize that the story you were mourning was never real to begin with. It was only a dream of who you thought you should have been. And awakening, after all, is nothing more than realizing that the dreamer was never separate from the dream. There comes a moment, often quietly, when you begin to understand that your life does not need to be different in order to be whole. It is a subtle shift, almost imperceptible at first. You stop asking, what should I be doing? And instead begin to listen. You start to feel that life, all along, has been whispering to you through everything you once ignored, through failure, through silence, through longing. It was never absent. You were simply too busy trying to edit the story to hear its voice. When this understanding dawns, it's not a flash of enlightenment, but more like the gradual clearing of fog. The trees of your existence, once obscured by regret and expectation, slowly come into view. You begin to see how perfectly imperfect it all was, how each stumble carved a kind of wisdom into your bones, how each disappointment softened your heart, and how even your confusion was guiding you toward clarity. This is the paradox of awakening. You find what you were seeking not by acquiring, but by relinquishing. The meaning you searched for begins to reveal itself when you stop demanding that life prove its worth. You realize that the search itself was never the problem. It was your assumption that meaning was missing that caused the ache. The feeling of having wasted your life was not the truth. It was the veil that covered it. And as that veil begins to fall, a new kind of stillness appears, not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of presence, the kind that exists between two heartbeats, in the quiet before you speak, in the way your chest rises without your asking. You notice that life doesn't need your permission to continue. It breathes you, it moves you, it carries you forward, regardless of your stories about it. You see, what most people call awakening is not the gaining of something new, but the gentle loss of what was never real. It's like waking from a long dream in which you spent years trying to find the meaning of the dream itself, only to realize that you were always safe in your bed. The dream was beautiful, tragic, complex, and rich, but it was never separate from the one who dreamt it. So too with life. You were never separate from the totality of it. Even in your loneliest, darkest hours, you were still held by the same intelligence that turns the planets and opens the flowers. You were never outside of that harmony, only asleep to it. To awaken, then, is not to rise above life, but to sink deeper into it, to see the extraordinary hiding within the ordinary, to realize that enlightenment was never a mountaintop, but the ground beneath your feet. You might look back now on all the years you thought were lost, and see that they were not lost at all. They were preparing you to see. They were the soil in which understanding could finally take root. Every regret was compost for wisdom. Every mistake was a seed of awareness waiting for the right season to bloom. And when that season arrives, you begin to move differently. Not because you found some grand new purpose, but because you are no longer fighting the rhythm of existence. Your actions become effortless, not because you've stopped caring, but because you finally trust the unfolding. You realize that your life was never something to manage, it was something to experience. The illusion of waste begins to dissolve because you no longer measure time in achievements, but in presence. You begin to see that 10 minutes of genuine awareness is worth more than 10 years of unconscious striving. When this recognition takes hold, even your past pain begins to glow with a strange light. You see that what once felt unbearable was, in fact, the breaking of the shell around your being. It was how life made space for itself within you, and you begin to thank the very moments that once made you curse your existence. You bow to the storm because you see now that it wasn't against you, it was refining you. And then something even deeper happens. You begin to laugh. Not out of mockery or defiance, but from the sheer relief of seeing how unnecessary all the struggle was. You realize that life had never required your control. It only needed your attention. You had been running through open fields with a blindfold on, searching for the way out, unaware that there were no walls. You may recall the times you prayed for clarity, for purpose, for a sign, and perhaps you now see that those prayers were answered not in words, but in silence. Not through instruction, but through revelation, because clarity does not come from adding more answers. It comes from letting go of all the questions that were never yours to carry. There's an old saying that the truth sets you free, but first it makes you uncomfortable. And that discomfort, that deep unease of not knowing what to do with your life, was the beginning of your freedom. It stripped you of false certainty, of borrowed dreams, of identities that were never truly yours. It left you naked before life itself. And that nakedness, that vulnerability, is the doorway to peace. Because when you stand without pretense, without the armor of who you think you should be, life finally meets you as you are. And that meeting is love. You begin to see that love was never something to find or to deserve. It was the quiet awareness that remained after everything else fell away. It is the gentle hum behind all experience, the soft current that carries every joy and every sorrow. When you touch that current, even briefly, you realize that nothing has ever truly been lost. For how can anything be lost in a universe that recycles itself infinitely? How can a life be wasted when each breath, each tear, each moment of longing becomes part of the great turning? You are not a fragment of the cosmos. You are the cosmos, looking at itself through the eyes of this particular human form.